You were probably looking for the treehouse as you were walking in, but it blends in nicely. A lot of people come up, they don't notice it until you point it out. And they're like, "Oh my God, wow, I love that." I like that it tucks in.
And we had no idea.
That was not the intent. It's just I'm so happy with it.
Like, I thought we were going to have a treehouse. We were going to have, like, you know, the treehouse. We were going to get out the spare wood and whatever. And then I was, oh, this is what you may build. Okay, we need to talk about this some more.
Right, it's not the kid treehouse.
It's not the kid treehouse anymore. Just basically, we didn't have a lot of. We said, well, you know, we wanted to be able to get a queen bed in here. We wanted the bathroom. This is a couch, but it's a pull-out. It's a full size, or it's a queen. I'm sorry, it's a queen size bed. When it gets pulled out, it's really comfortable on bed. There is a composting toilet in there. Yeah, we love the windows, like just the light and the kind of airiness of it. And it's beautiful on a summer night. I wanted a bunch of windows. I said I wanted the skylight. I wanted to look up in the tree, although right now it's getting pretty. It needs to figure out how to wash that.
Yeah, I'll get up there and wash it.
Yeah.
It's annoying.
The pollen goes.
You know, like, we're on a hanging structure, right? And so when the wind gets blowing, like, it's fun up here.
It's a little more, yeah.
It's moving, yeah.
A little bit. It does. I would say the island moves a bit more. This one's just got so much mass that it doesn't. But that one, if you go out on the suspension bridge and go to the island, it'll rock a little bit more.
This is an amazing feature. This deck over here is like the kitchen of the treehouse. It's like anytime there's guests over, like they're all hanging out over there. I think it's just fun. You get to kind of look back at the structure and just be totally submerged in nature. You're immersed. They even have, like, you know, they have their barbecue up here. Look, it's all set up, a plant. I mean, here you can really feel the movement of the structure because there's not so much weight on it, right? It has a wiggle.
So here you chose to be within the fairy ring?
Yeah, so the spacing in between the trees unobstructed was big enough to fit the size of structure that we were looking to build. And which, for a structure of this size, is very typical of fairy rings. Fairy rings are the children of the original, you know, mother tree in the center, which in California, most of those giant redwoods in a lot of areas like this 50 years ago were farmed. And so you find a lot of rings like this, and typically you'll see an old rotting giant base that's, you know, 8 foot in diameter and a bunch of 2, 3, 4 foot diameter redwoods around it. It's a perfect scenario for suspending a structure like this in between.
So the redwoods, when the original redwood dies, that's how they reproduce, is they put out these little suckers that go all around it, so you get these things called fairy rings. And so we had this fairy ring, and this is one we were like, yeah, we think we want to put a tree house here. And Dustin came and looked at the site, and he's like, you know, you have a second fairy ring right there. You could link them together, and yes, suspension bridge. Like, it was such an easy sell. Okay. The permitting process is so onerous in San Mateo County that because there's no hardwired electricity, there's no plumbing, so therefore you don't need a permit to build them. It's kind of a little bit of a workaround. That's partly why. So this got built really fast because we didn't have to pay for it.
As far as permits,
this one's got a little more sway to it than the other one. So depending on, like, who you're inviting up here, like, some people are really excited and some people are not so excited.
You know, of course, building something that is suspended needs to be torsionally, like, strong. And so, you know, triangles really need to be part of that design. And so geodesics, or, you know, in this case, this triangulated space frame works really well. You can see the space frame system there. We call it the Tetratruss. It's, you know, if you're going to Google it, it's actually the octet truss is the name for it, that geometry. 2014, where I originally conceived the idea and, like, started developing it. But now it's like a pre-engineered system. And it's basically like treehouse Legos, I say. You know, it's like modular system. It's got one hub and 2 strut designs. It's awesome. I think we've just kind of scratched the surface as far as what's capable with this system, you know, because it's modular. We can really play around with like multiple levels and like catwalks, you know, like, you know, diagonal staircases up to other platforms and those. So you can really start to play around with, you know, what I feel like something that's really akin to building tree houses, the level of the ground. Like, where do you enter the structure? You can play with the levels more than you can with a house, I feel like. So, you know, as you can see, there's a hub, like central connecting bracket, and that's actually based upon a tetrahedron shape. Then you have these radiating members of the truss system. So we essentially have a 3.5 foot thick beam here. So it has tremendous span distance capability and strength in that way. You know, also it's modular. So from a transportation standpoint, like if you're logistically trying to get deep into the forest, you don't have to do high lines to essentially zip line large timbers in, which makes it logistically way easier to do. And it works really well actually for our method of installing a tree house using the suspension method, because we can actually suspend our cables and use any one of the hubs on either of the courses, the top course or the bottom course of the truss system. So yeah, you can see it's this a T-bar profile piece of steel. So then we weld on this tab, the suspension point, and then this plate's on here because we actually you know, hang from the tree in our saddles upside down and, you know, have our sledgehammer strapped in and kind of pendulum and knock it into the tree. Yeah.
So this is a really important point here. It's holding a lot of the weight? Or?
Absolutely, yeah. It's holding entirely all of the weight, you know, distributed amongst a number of different tree tons into the redwood trees in this case.
So this is the only point that it's touching the tree. There's no other...
There's no other hard points. It's completely suspended. I mean, you can, you know, if you're in conversation, you can kind of feel it moving a little bit, you know, if you're just gesturing.
Yeah. So how much of this then is prefab?
All the pieces for the truss system, for the Tetratruss, are prefabricated.
Okay.
And then we prefabricated every one of the wall panels. And we went as far as to have the exterior metal skin on it as well. And that came complete with the paneling, the birch paneling on it. You know, so it had the sheathing, the house wrap, the steel facade panels, and the rain screen already, you know, worked into the prefab.
So the panels would be...
I mean, they're represented, each section that was originally a prefabricated section is represented by the sheet steel here. So like this was a triangle panel that dropped in, and the same thing here had that shape. Because as I mentioned, like these came out like already on it. Okay. And so all we had to do when we installed it was add this trim in between. So we have, you know, 1/2-inch insulated glass panes and then a rain screen. So everything has battens underneath it and is stepped away from the surface of the house wrap and the sheathing, which is super important. All structures should have that in a context like this, right? As redwood forests they're essentially rainforests. You know, they're very, very wet climates, and they, like fog, condenses onto all of the branches high in the trees and then turns into rain. You know, so it's not necessarily raining. There's thick fog out there, but it's just fog. As soon as that fog hits the branches and all the needles of these conifer trees, it starts dripping. So I don't know, I just call it redwood drip. And then this is a bit different as far as like our, you know, facade system here. So these are stepped off steel panels, and then we have a built-in gutter that's caulked in, so any water or moisture that gets to the top of that panel gets carried over to the sides and then drops down behind the trim. And then we had sections of the roof beams prefabricated with this diagonal blocking in between. It's built just like a SIP system, but it doesn't use styrofoam. I love the SIP style ease of building, but I didn't like the fact that it glues OSB onto the styrofoam because, what's the end of life cycle for that, And so we actually defined a cavity in each one of the prefabricated wall sections and then pump that with a cellulose insulation. So here you can see one, here. And then these rake windows is just a general feature on most of the roof systems that we do with this equilibrium home building system. And, putting a skylight in any treehouse is a great idea. I think just basic as a standpoint of building a structure, we're making so much effort to be in an untypical environment in nature, that's important that you create a lot of windows, that you really feel like you're in and amongst nature, even when you're inside. That's west facing, and so kind of through these trees, you can see the sun setting, and you really get that bewitching hour of the warm light coming through, and it's really amazing. I really wanted to create a lot of directional movement with the windows of the structure, and so came up with this idea to have the diagonal kind of slant and then just do this entire area as a window wall. This one ended up being on the more rustic side, even though it is still very modern. I think probably next generations of this building system will probably go with more full panel, full wall, window panes. It is a small space. I think we're at 150 square feet. So this is a hide-a-bed. So this folds out and turns into a bedroom. Actually, quite a few of the other equilibrium home systems that we've built, they all have lofts in it. So we do much higher walls, and we've done a A-frame style roof, also another one with a shed style roof, and created a loft for additional sleeping space. This one, so we have this bathroom right here. It has a composting toilet here. It vents any sort of smell in. It has a positive pressure fan that pulls it out. It's a typical composting toilet. It does filter the pee down, so we have a drain running down into a French drain at the base of the tree. And they have plans to upgrade and put a little sink in here, and either directly plumb that up the tree or do a cistern system, but just haven't gotten around to that yet. But we have done off-grid cistern tree systems. We have a larger cistern, water storage on the ground, and then pumps water up into a holding tank, and then that helps just have positive pressure from gravity feed into the sink.
Is this something related to the installation you have?
Yeah, so that's just a cigarette lighter, low voltage system that they installed here. So it's not a full 120 volt system. LED lights, all that make it really easy to do off-grid, of course, if you're going solar.
Is this off grid or is this?
This is, I believe this is grid-tied low voltage system. If they did 120 volt electricity, they would need to get a permit. We have hardly permitted any structures that we've built by trying to stay within the size and limitations to not have to get a permit. The idea for a treehouse came about real casually because my dad had just moved into a new house and he had some epic trees on it. We were reminiscing about a treehouse he built for my sister and I kind of got this hook. I went to school for furniture design. Oh wow, that would be super fun to design a treehouse. What I know now, my experience in design school, how would I go about that process? And so it was really, just an idea that I was sketching on in my sketchbook. Once I graduated, I kind of had this aha moment. I came to the point in the design where I'm like, oh, a geodesic sphere would be this really amazing kind of poetic shape to use in a treehouse context, because that particular shape is related in a lot of ways to the geometry of nature. It's super efficient with space, of course, enclosing the most amount of volume for the least amount of materials. I was already a huge fan of Buckminster Fuller's, and I was also way into geometrical things, and there's so much to be explored in geodesic, forms and like how it all works. It was not necessarily like, oh, like everybody needs to live in the trees and like this is a sustainable way and direction. It was more like this is an interesting comment about humans and the context in which they live and choose to live and like how they're relating to nature. My huge passion is just like exploring alternative forms and building new things and got outside of the envelope of the geodesics. And Treehouses was a context of building microarchitecture that was just continually thrilling. Like each location kind of calls for, a specific arrangement, the capability of the trees, the arrangement of the trees in relation to the floor plan of the structure. The weight of the structure is something that needs to be known and engineered. And so it's kind of a totally different, weird context, almost in between aviation and home building that comes together.